40 years ago, commenced this year. Rose through the ranks of the Union, fought many great battles nationwide in this region in particular. I'm proud of what we have achieved historically through the trade union movement, and no stronger defender of the trade unions in Parliament than me. Some of the battles I fought in this region, the Kraft takeover of Cadbury's, when Gerard and I got 59 sacked workers at Two Sisters reinstated 9 weeks after they were sacked. But let me just focus briefly on the automotive sector, because there's people here from way beyond the automotive sector, but it's at the heart of the economy of this region. With Tony Woodley, I worked to keep Rover open in 2000. With Tony Woodley, we worked night and day to try and keep Rover open in 2005, when tragically it went over the brink. 2008, when we had the economic crash, again with Tony, we negotiated with the Labour government, the scrappage scheme. Do you remember? It saw 400,000 cars being built and avoided the automotive sector from collapsing. And then more recently, my first priority after I got elected was the future of the Jaguar plant in Erlington. It's very good to see my friends from the plant here. And I remember going in before the election, and it was like a funeral meeting with the shop stewards, because everyone thought the Jag was dead. And I spent my first 6 months after the general election working with the shop stewards, the workforce of all of the plants and the company, putting together that great day in October 2010. Do you remember when we stood outside the gate and we said that the factory that built the Spitfire during the war and the Jaguar, 2 generations of it after the war, is now safe for the next generation? And the relevance of that I'll come to in just one moment. Now, can I own up? I'm old enough to have voted back in 1975, and I voted to come out of the then common market. All I would say, there's other offences I wish to be taken into consideration, but I did it in good faith. Why did I change my mind? And why did the overwhelming majority of the Labour movement change its mind? It was the 1980s. Let me tell you a little story. European law forced our government, a Thatcher government, to introduce what's called the Acquired Rights Directive, CUPI in our language. Some of you would have been transferred under CUPI. And what they did was they gritted their teeth, said, all right, we've got to do it, but we're going to exclude 6 million public servants from the coverage of CUPI. What then happened for 10 years was a shameful auction on terms and conditions of employment and pay and jobs. I remember the Fire Service Training College, Moreton and Marsh, 130 caterers and housekeepers in tears because half the workforce was getting sacked and their pay was getting cut by 1/3. And then eventually, the Eastbourne dustman came to see me. And to cut a long story short, I said, well, hang on a second, maybe we can challenge this in European law, and we did. And we went all the way to the European Court of Justice and to the European Commission, and we won. And I'll never forget a Greek socialist commissioner saying, why should British workers be treated any less favourably than workers in the rest of the continent? And CUPI was extended to cover 6 million public servants, bringing to an end that shameful decade. I'm going to ask, does anyone here put their faith in what Boris Johnson then says, trust me, all will be well for British workers, in the immortal words of Ricky Tomlinson, my arse? The simple reality is you can't trust them as far as you can throw them, and just look at what they've actually said. What they've actually said. Boris Johnson, we have to roll back the social tide of Europe. Daniel Hannan, a very smart, quite an evil guy, one of his associates, who says that contracts should not be determined through trade unions. It should be between the employer and the employee, the strong and the individual. Well, that's not where we come from as a union. So the simple reality is that a whole generation of hard-won rights would be at risk if we leave the European Union. Next, the economic case. And now, to be absolutely frank, one of the problems about this discussion has been that there's been billions here and billions there, and there's a bewildering array of facts, isn't there, getting thrown at people. And I often say in the House of Commons that I don't see things through with the prism of the Westminster bubble. I see things through the eyes of Joe and Josephine Soap in The Dog and Duck in Erdington. And what matters to them? One of the things I often say about the constituency I'm proud to represent, it's rich in talent, but it's one of the poorest in the country. And that's why I come back to Jaguar Land Rover and what we achieved. The success in 2010 that we built upon subsequently. We were down to what, 1,500 workers in 2010? We're now over 3,000 and expanding. And I've seen the consequences of that. Why? Inward investment. Key to inward investment is membership of the European Union. Simple reality, as night follows day, big beast multinationals will make a decision as to what's in their best interest. And if it's a choice between 500 million people on the continent or 50 million people in Britain that have left the European Union, I know the choice they'll make. They won't close the Jag or Solihull. But what we'll see increasingly, or Wolverhampton, what we'll see increasingly, new investment, new models, not going to British plants. And I don't want to see that happen. And I don't want to see that happen precisely because of the difference it's made to the people I represent in Erdington. I remember down Mason's Road, just down from my office, this big bear of a guy. I'm not small myself, but I look like a tiddler compared to him. This big bear of a guy, Jack, and I recognised him. He was a guy, it was a scheme that we put in place to get into the Jag for an apprenticeship. And he's finished his apprenticeship, and he was moving into this house with his partner, and her mum and dad were there. And do you know what? He got dewy-eyed, a tear in his eye, talking about, Jack, I never thought this was possible. I was out of work until I got an apprenticeship. I've now got a good and secure job. I'm buying the house of my dreams with the woman I love. I can't believe this is happening. And for me, that's why when we talk about the economy and all of the billions and the figures, that's why it matters remaining in the European Union. 3 million jobs, 200,000 businesses. And just one other thing in terms of the balance between them and us. Nearly half of what we produce goes to the European Union. Only 15% of what they produce comes to Britain. It would be easier for them, but it would be damn difficult for us. Next, on security. Now, I'm the Shadow Police Minister. I'm proud to say fought and won the battle last November, you may remember, when the Tories were going to cut the police service in half. At a time like this, we are living through the most uniquely awful period in our history in terms of the threat of terrorism. And I know because I deal with the head of counter-terrorism. And there's highly developed arrangements throughout Europe for cooperation, collaboration, information sharing, which has seen that combined with neighbourhood policing here in Britain. There's nearly 1 arrest a day now for terrorism in Britain. But those highly developed arrangements have been absolutely key, particularly as you've had jihadis seeking to move across the continent. And we, thank God, as a consequence, have avoided some of the terrible things that have happened in continental Europe. But it's not just counter-terrorism. On a whole range of fronts, human trafficking, drug trafficking, the combating cybercrime. I'll give you an example, an operation I went to go and see it. There was a group of Brits who went to Spain, set up bogus businesses, and then for a 2-year period, they mugged online, because you're more likely now to be mugged online than you are in the street. They mugged online British businesses on the one hand, and British pensioners on the other. People who maybe were not quite as savvy in terms of protecting their interests. It was Anglo-Spanish cooperation that led to those bastards ending up in prison. And then finally there's the European arrest warrant. With the European arrest warrant, it used to take, do you remember the days of the Costa del Sol bank robbers? You used to see these things on TV, guys who would rob banks and then spend the next 5, 10 and 15 years on the Costa del Sol living the life of Larry off the back of the proceeds. Well, now, because of the European arrest warrant, rather than 10 years, they're back within weeks. We sent back 7,400 to face justice, and we've had back here 1,100 to face justice. I was in Leeds just the other day, and this guy, an evil man, brutal rape of a 20-year-old Leeds woman. He was brought back from the continent within 6 weeks and is now serving 20 years in prison, and absolutely rightly so. So security matters. And can I just on security, one final point. just to nail a myth, what you hear the whole time from the Brexiteers is we've lost control of our borders. Bullshit. We opted out what was called the Schengen Agreement. Now, you know, if you come back through an airport, you've got to show your passport. And as a consequence of that, hundreds every year get barred from coming into the country. We haven't become part of those European Union arrangements, in my view, rightly so. Now, Gerard then raised the issue, and it's right that we take it head on, the issue of immigration. Can I just start by saying this? My dad came from County Cork to dig roads. My mother came from County Tipperary to train as a nurse in a London hospital. They met in the Galtymore dance hall in Cricklewood, where tens of thousands of Irish weddings were born. And I was born personally in Kilburn. It used to be called 33rd County because it was 75% Irish. And I remember my dad, when I was 13 years old, telling me for the first time, and he couldn't look me in the eyes, he was looking down at the ground, what it was like to come to this country and to see signs in Kilburn and Cricklewood. Do you remember the old days, lodging houses, no Irish, no dogs? And then it became no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. So forgive me if I say this, one of my starting points is I'll never ever allow our country to be divided in the way that right now Nigel Farage is trying to divide it. Having said that, I've always believed that it is right that we talk about immigration and the problems associated with immigration. I work with Gerard in this region, the heart of Unite, and dare I say it, no finer regional secretary than Gerard Coyne. I work with Gerard in my former being when we took on exploitation of the newly arrived and undercutting of workers here for generations, British workers. I remember when we organised the meat industry, including the plants in this region. We used to have agency workers, overwhelmingly migrant, poorer conditions of employment. The directly employed, overwhelmingly British or second and third generation like West Indian, better conditions of employment, toxic divisions. And we said to the governor, you're not on. We're not going to allow you to undercut workers by exploiting the newly arrived. So I've always taken a very hard-headed view of the duty to protect those who have been here for generations. And there's other pressures in some communities, on schools, on housing. Of that, there's absolutely no doubt. So I'm all in favour of a hard-headed discussion. I've not got a problem about the proposal which says if you haven't got a job within 6 months, you go back. I've not got a problem about saying to people they should pay into the social security system before they draw out. I've not got a problem about those. I'll tell you what, I do have a problem about the evil of racism, which is being perpetrated more and more and more by the Leave campaign. And let me just say this in all frankness to our friends here today, let's have the debate around immigration, is that if people voted simply on the basis of that, the price that we will end up paying as an economy and a country in terms of workers, their jobs, their pay, their conditions, the next generation, our sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters, and incidentally, even existing pensioners. Because if we have, and there's today a figure out, £60 billion has just gone from the country, investment flooding out now. If we have our economy contracting, it will impact upon pensions and occupational pension schemes in particular. So people have got to judge with their head, not their heart. But just one other thing on immigration is that what's the alternative that they point to? They started off by Norway. Norway's out with the European Union. But Norway then has to subscribe to all the rules of the European Union, none of us say, pay into the European Union and got more immigrants per head than we'd have. They then went on, one of them, I kid you not, to Albania. How many people here want to go and live in Albania? And now they're talking about Australia and the points-based system in Australia. And again, there's more immigrants per head. So it's a complex issue, and it's phony promises that are being made by people who've got an agenda, and they hope that they can calm the British people by playing the immigration and race card, and shame on them. Look, just 2 points in conclusion, please, is that all of the things that I've said for me about workers. Above all, I want a workers' Britain. Workers, workers' rights, economic security, national security, safety where you live and work. All of those things are crucial. But also one other thing. The great Ernie Bevin, who was the first General Secretary of the T&G, he affiliated the Empire War Graves Commission Association to the T&G in 1938. It then became the Commonwealth War Graves Commission Association after the war. 80% of the British war dead are buried in Germany, Belgium, Holland and France. And I'm sure many people here have seen the war graves. 80%. And those who look after them are ex-soldiers. When I was a young national officer with hair, back in the 1980s, I dealt with them for 3 years. Bert Barrett was then the General Secretary. And Bert stormed ashore on D-Day, fought his way to mid-Belgium, got badly injured, fell in love with the nurse who looked after him, and never went home. Spent the rest of his life looking after those war graves. And I remember he took me to a particular war grave, 3,000 headstones. 3,000 headstones. 19, 21, 23, unknown, unknown, 18, 19. The flower of European youth in the 2 greatest wars in human history that killed more people than every other war in human history. All right, I don't believe we're going to have World War III, but I'll tell you what, a continent where we have banished the fear of war in the way that it stalked our continent for 100 years. Actually, it was Winston Churchill who said that that was a great prize for Europe coming together. Now, just one final point, and that's this. I'm proud of my country, proud of my Irish background, but I'm proud of my country. I want Great Britain to be truly Great Britain. But do you know what? Is there not a lesson for us as trade unionists? I used to say when I was recruiting as a lay member and a district officer, if you believe that you can get what you want, when you want, by yourselves, without a union, you don't need a union, you need a doctor. Because the world of work is very different from that. And forgive me if I read that parallel across to our interest as Great Britain. Do we really believe that our country can be truly great, going from strength to strength, if we stand alone out with the European Union? I think that is a myth. It's an absolute myth. So for me, it's about voting for working people. It's about voting for the kind of country we want to be. And unashamedly, it's the patriotic case for why we want Great Britain to remain Great Britain. And dare I say it, at the heart of that, the greatest union in the trade union movement, and that's Unite. Thanks very much.